Hi, thank you for joining me today with this presentation on New England's alpine flowers, the Alpine zone, and a few other things of interest, the science that's going on up in the Alpine zone, and also some of the work that's being done to help restore and protect some of this fragile environment. My name is Joe Klementovich, and through the introduction, I'm not sure what you were told, but I've spent a handful of years as a avalanche forecaster on Mount Washington, and more recently, I've spent the last few seasons working on some film and photography projects up in the Alpine zone, primarily focused on the New Hampshire White Mountains. There's one of my favorite alpine plants is the mountain avon up around Lake of the Clouds. So New Hampshire is probably the kind of the crown jewel of the Alpine zone here in New England. We don't have any Alpine zones further south, and the U.S. Forest Service, or the White Mountain National Forest, has 8 square miles of Alpine zone, and Alpine zone is roughly it starts at around 3,800 feet, but the image on the left is an aerial view of the southern presidentials looking from above Mount Monroe and heading south. So you can see all that area where the trees end up getting shorter and shorter into a more of a tundra environment. And the image to the right is near Lake of the Clouds, and you can see again there's no trees. I think the definition of Alpine zone is no trees over 8 feet tall, and our Alpine zone here in New Hampshire is certainly less than 8 feet tall, those trees. New York has roughly 100 acres in the Adirondack Park, and that's a state park that has 6 million acres. So they've got a considerably less area of Alpine zone. And Maine's Katahdin has the tablelands, and right around the peak of Katahdin has 2.8 square miles of Alpine zone. And over in Vermont, I believe just around Mount Mansfield, there is as little as 250 acres of Alpine zone. So here in New Hampshire and Maine, we're pretty lucky to have a pretty wide area of Alpine. So I'll primarily focus on New Hampshire. I live in North Conway, and the White Mountains are kind of in my backyard. Here's a little view of the bypass that goes around Mount Monroe. So the peak up and to the right is Mount Monroe. And this is a really beautiful place to explore if you don't want to get up into the peaks, but you're staying at Lake of the Clouds. It's a nice flat trail that explores the east side of Mount Monroe, and on both sides of it has a tremendous amount of alpine flowers. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit, all the different varieties of alpine flowers. But when you are on the trail, and especially in June and early July, we have a really interesting variety of alpine flowers that grow almost nowhere else but here in New England in the Alpine zone. And there's 5 of those plants to discuss, and I'll hit them real quickly. But this is Diapensia. It's the white flower right there, and that little pod of flower and foliage is about the size of a baseball, and they're sprinkled out throughout the Alpine zone. The Lapland rosebay. This is a more delicate flower. It tends to live in more sheltered areas, in less exposed windy areas. You can see the flower is a much larger and more delicate flower compared to the Diapensia. The Alpine azalea you can tell, but if you look real closely, the leaves look a little bit like a coffee bean. They have this kind of a dent through the center portion of it, so it separates the leaf into almost two parts. They've got a beautiful pink little flower, and they live really close to the ground. So these are found in areas where high winds, anywhere in the Alpine zone encounters high winds, but these have evolved into being able to withstand places that aren't very sheltered. And then there's the dwarf cinquefoil, also known as robin cinquefoil. And this is one of the, if maybe the only federally endangered species that actually recovered and was able to be taken off of the federally endangered species list. So it's a bit of a success story. There's a small area where it lives, and there was a trail going through it, I believe back in the 70s or 80s. That trail was rerouted, and basically eliminating any kind of human impact, the plant was able to make a comeback and continue to grow and thrive even in this rugged environment. And the fifth one is the mountain avens, and I saw this one earlier, but this tends to live in low-lying, wetter areas up in the Alpine zone. This is just right next to one of the small Lake of the Clouds. So I know I rambled through those pretty quick, but there's a really interesting app called iNaturalist out there you can grab on your phone, and the way it works is you take a photograph of the flower or the plant or even animals, and you photograph it, and then you can upload it, and it will give you 5 or 6 suggestions as to what it is. And then after a day or so, people will actually look at it and make sure what you assumed is correct. So you get kind of this peer review of your photograph, and then you can see what plants you've seen, what plants you've taken pictures of, and where they are. The AMC is also working with iNaturalist to help survey the alpine flowers up in the Alpine zone here in New England. So if you're interested in that, you can go to iNaturalist and look at the New England Alpine Flower Project, and you can find out more about that and how you can help when you're out hiking. You can take a quick picture of one of these flowers, and your GPS coordinate will help them understand where the flowers are, when they're flowering, and how climate change is affecting their growth cycles. So when you are out in the Alpine zone, a lot of people explore it in different ways. Spring skiing, hiking, climbing, all of that, and also just driving to the summit of Mount Washington. But when you are visiting and exploring the Alpine zone in the spring, take your time, stay on the rocks or stay on the snow, and avoid stepping on any of the alpine plants and flowers. Here's an image of what happens. This is up above Tuckerman Ravine, where there's a lot of skier traffic in the spring, and this is a common cutoff between a couple gullies, and this is what happens when a lot of foot traffic goes over either thinly snow-covered vegetation or no cover at all. So we're trying to avoid that. Here's another photograph of, this is a diapensia after it's bloomed. So it kind of looks just like a common moss, but if you look to the lower left, you can see where it's been stepped on or disturbed, and the top foliage has been pulled apart and exposing its branch structure. There's a little zoom in on that so you can see what that structure looks like underneath that little mound of foliage, but you can quickly see that that's not really going to help that plant grow very well if it continues to grow at all. And that's what the healthy diapensia looks like. And I think I mentioned earlier, this small, probably like maybe that size, 2 to 3 inches across. Botanists assume that is probably a 30 or 40-year old plant. So they grow slow and they don't have a long growing season. But if you do leave them alone, they become these beautiful little flowering plants. And if you get a chance to go up hiking or up on the auto road, if you can't hike, you can see these plants right off the road, right off the trail, and they are beautiful in usually mid-June, early June, when they start to blossom. They grow everywhere in the Alpine zone. A lot of times they're mixed together in these wonderful combinations of color. You can see here, this is a azalea, Alpine azalea is the pink, and the diapensia is the white in the back. And those white flowers are only less than an inch tall. So it gives you an idea of the scale there. And so, one of the things is to just stay on the rocks and stay on the trail. You can still get these photographs. You can still see those and experience those flowers, but not walking off into that and trampling any of the vegetation. Again, if you're on the auto road, it's right in June and early July, you can see these plants flowering up above tree line right from your car window. A lot of spring skiers kind of push things right into the end where there's very little snow left. And ideally, those guys are staying on the rocks and avoiding any kind of vegetation while you're out visiting. And you can see here, just as like midsummer on a trail where people are walking side by side instead of on a single trail. So it just ends up destroying the vegetation. And, with only 2 or 8 square miles of area for these plants to live, every square foot helps. So I've done a few projects over the last few years with White Mountain Trail Collective, and they're working on helping to maintain these trails and build rock work and screen walls to keep people on the trails and thus help continue to protect and restore some of this delicate alpine vegetation. They work closely with a handful of botanists. Here's one doing a transect where they're taking some population studies and finding out what plants are growing along the trails and what those populations are doing. And they also point out to the trail crews what areas to be sensitive of and where not to build new walls or where to protect more important species. Here's a shot of the top of Mount Lafayette, and it's one of the higher traffic areas here in the White Mountains, and you can see that people just kind of wander all over. The more you stay on the trail, the more you stay on the rocks, then the better off all this alpine vegetation is going to be. And then when you do visit in the spring, and that explosion of color and bloom will be that much better. So if you look in the late summer, you can't really see it, just looks like brown plants. And if you don't know that, you're likely to walk on it. So spread the word and let people know that that's better to stay on the rocks than on the grass and the vegetation. Because as you look at it, it just kind of does look like grass. It looks like something that you really wouldn't have to worry about. But that purplish burgundy color on the right is that's the Alpine azalea. And the Lapland rosebay kind of runs through the middle there with the small white buds. But you can see they can grow anywhere, and they're rugged little plants. And they're also a source of food for another interesting species up there in the White Mountains. In the photograph here is Sam, and she is worked last year, the year before, studying the White Mountain fritillary. Is a butterfly that lives just in the Alpine zone, and she's working on studying the population and seeing if they can migrate from peak to peak through genetics. It's a close-up of what that butterfly looks like. And she actually collected a few and was able to successfully breed some of them in captivity to hopefully increase the population throughout the White Mountains. I mentioned earlier the dwarf cinquefoil was on the national or the federally endangered species, and here are two Forest Service or one Forest Service. No, excuse me. The lady on the left is a master's student at Plymouth State, and she's studying the genetics of the dwarf cinquefoil. So they're collecting leaves, and then they go back and study that population and its genetics. So they do a survey of the area, and then they measure it. They do some DNA studies, and hopefully we'll be able to tell if that is the only genetic strain in that area, or if there are more genetic strains spread throughout the White Mountains. Another interesting part of these alpine flowers and how they've evolved is in the fall, they go from green to a burgundy. And from what I understand, that is to help them better absorb light energy. So when it gets into fall and there's less light in winter, they're able to stay warmer. And this picture here, the green spot is actually where there was a rock laying on the mat of Alpine azalea. I removed the rock in the fall just as I walked by, and you can see that that place under the rock hasn't yet changed into that burgundy dark color. So the fall is another great time to go visit the Alpine zone. A lot of people kind of focus on the fall foliage of the maples down in the valley and those beautiful colors, but above tree line, it has some pretty spectacular colors as well. And there's also a tremendous amount of colors with the fruit, and this is the fruit berry of the Alpine azalea, and some more of the beautiful yellow colors in a mat of Diapensia. And those little brown stalks are the spent flowers and the seeds of the Diapensia as they get into late fall. And more just beautiful colors up there, but you have to look closely to find them. And as fall turns into winter, these plants obviously have nowhere to go. They're, you know, we can jump in our car and head back home and snuggle next to a nice warm fire, but these plants are living in one spot, right? They're encased in snow and ice throughout the winter, and it's just a rough way to spend your winter. There's you know, the snow and the ice help protect them from the high winds and drying them out, but certainly not all things get covered in snow. And oftentimes with our high winds here in the White Mountains, that snow gets scoured down to leaving them exposed to the winds, and a lot of damage gets done through that way. But if they make it through that long winter we have here in the high mountains, they provide a beautiful show in the spring. As the snow is melting here in early June, these Diapensia and all the other species start to blossom and soak up those nice warm spring rays. And so if we do a good job exploring the Alpine zone here, we'll all get to enjoy these tiny little beautiful flowers and all the other beautiful things that they provide, whether it's a large mat of blossoming flowers, or if it's the butterflies and the tiny little berries that we see in the fall. So hopefully you were able to get a few things out of this. I think I know I enjoy going up in the Alpine zone from the spring all the way into the fall, and even in the winter. So if you get a chance to get out and explore the Alpine zone, please do so. and make sure you do it with care and be careful where you tread. Thanks for joining me for this presentation, and I hope to see you out in the mountains. Thank you.